Welcome and or welcome back to my channel. I'm Hannah Blackwell and today we're going to talk about some standalone fantasy romance books. I have some awesome standalone fantasy romance book recommendations for you guys. I was inspired by Jess from Honest Fiction, who recently posted her standalone romantasy fantasy romance book recommendations, and I will pop her video down below and up here in the cards if you want to check that out. She has some great recommendations. But I have some more recommendations for you right now that are standalones. If you want to read a fantasy romance book but you don't want to deal with a series, you just want to have a one and done situation, which I totally get, especially if you're like me and trying to finish out series and you want to have like a palate cleanser between series and things like that, but you don't want to start a new series, having a standalone is perfection. So let's get into this list. Before we do though, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already and click the like button. Comment down below with your standalone fantasy romance recommendations so we can all help each other out. Let's get into this video. Okay, so the first book I'm going to recommend to you right now is by the Queen, Ruby Dixon, and this is The King's Spinster Bride. This is actually a novella, so it's nice and short and it's a standalone. Like some of the other books in this series, I'm considering it a standalone because the couple has completed their HEA by the end of the book. Other books may be in this series, but they follow different couples and each book can be read independently of the others. They can be read in any order as if they are a standalone. They're just kind of in the series, maybe because they're like in the same world or they're interconnected, that kind of thing. So The King's Spinster Bride is a really cool story about this woman who is a princess and she ends up saving the prince who her father is holding captive because he is the prince of a different kingdom, and they are the Cyclopae. So they are kind of like a cyclops, like they have one eye, but they are not born this way. They do this as like a ritual when they join the military. So she ends up saving him, and many years later, he wants to repay the favor. Not just does he want to repay the favor, really. Like, he's actually obsessed with her. He has been in love with her since he was really little, but it's not like weird like that. But it is an age gap, so when he comes back for her, she is maybe in her, I don't know, her 30s, and he is maybe in his early 20s, something like that. It might be like a 15-year age difference, but they're both adults, and he comes back for her when she is living at this monastery. He comes and picks her up and is like, I'm gonna make you my bride. And it's really sweet. It's so cute. She doesn't really like believe she's worth being a bride. She thinks she's like way past her prime. She doesn't understand why he wants her, because to her, she's like a spinster. She doesn't understand why anyone would want him. And he's like, no, you're literally the most perfect person in the whole entire world for me. And he's just obsessed with everything about her. And so it's very sweet, very cute, very spicy, and an awesome standalone fantasy romance read. I'm over here trying not to sneeze right now. Oh, God. You guys know when you have to sneeze, but it won't happen. I'm trying to get over this cold and it's like, it has me in its grips. I'm going to try not to sneeze. I'm going to talk about the next book. Okay, the next one is A Heart of Blood and Ashes by Mila Vane. This is such a cool historical fantasy romance. And once again, this is in an interconnected series, but this book is definitely a standalone. And this is a true enemies to lovers. The hero, his parents were unalived by the heroine's family. She doesn't realize that she hates her family too. So when he comes across her traveling, he takes her captive. So another captor-captive situation. He takes her captive, and then he finds out that she's like, no, I hate my family too. Let's have an alliance together and try to take them down. But he doesn't really trust her. He still definitely has it out for her. He hates her because he hates her family, and he doesn't realize how much her family has made her life a living hell. So it's so freaking good. It's very almost like, I think, Celtic inspired. I think it's Celtic inspired and kind of very historical feeling, very like a barbarian. He's like kind of like in a barbarian type of clan of sorts. It's so good. I highly recommend it. The writing is beautiful. It's very political. It is just a very well built story and very well written. I loved it. I highly recommend. A beautiful couple, a perfectly done enemy to lovers. Okay, the next one is The Longing of Lone Wolves by Lana Pechurzik. This is a futuristic dystopian, but a dystopia where people kind of go back to historical ways, if that makes sense. Like, there's not like technology and things like that, I don't believe. And it's also like a icy, polar, like very cold world. It's very icy, it's snowing, that kind of thing. And this is where the Fae, I believe, are like wolf shifters, or at least this Fae is. I think there's all different kind of magical creatures. Anyway, he is a shifter, but I think they're Fae too. This is also an enemies to lovers, and our heroine is like dropped into this world from Las Vegas, like modern day Las Vegas. And she's just dropped in, and she encounters our hero, and he takes her captive, obviously, and things go from there. This one, it's been probably maybe 3 years since I've read it. I remember having a good time, but it definitely wasn't super memorable for me. Now, I'm not sure if that's because it's been so long since I read it, or because maybe it wasn't like the perfect fantasy romance for me. But I will say the reason I'm including it on this list is because this book is talked about still so much, and this whole series is talked about so much on BookTube and Bookstagram and BookTok, and so many people love this series and this book. So that's why I'm putting this on here, because each book in this series follows a different couple, has its own individual storyline, so I'm definitely still counting it as a standalone. But I am considering reading like the next books just so that I can kind of get like a refresher, see if I really do want to read more in this world, because it was a good time. It's just been so long. But I think right now we are still in winter. It's still a great time to read those icy settings. And if you like those Fae wolf shifters and a captive captor enemies to lovers situation, then this might be a really perfect one for you. Another book that I have to talk about if we're talking about standalone fantasy romances is Entreat Me by Grace Draven. I love recommending this book because I still feel like it is so criminally underrated. More people need to read this book. This is a really interesting take on a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It's a full-on standalone, so there's no interconnected books that have characters that are connected to it like in a interconnected series kind of thing. It's a full standalone. But it's actually interesting because it's our heroine's sister's Beauty. The guy that she's falling in love with is the Beast. But also his dad's the Beast too, kind of. But our heroine is like older, more like a little bit spinstery. She's just kind of trying to take care of her sister. And it's just the two of them taking care of each other. And her sister is falling in love with this guy. Our heroine's like, listen, I'm not gonna let you go to his castle and hang out there and be there without a chaperone. I'm coming with you. Well, when she does, she meets his dad, who is our hero, but both men have this curse that makes them like turn into these beasts. And then there's these like enchanted rose vines that are part of the curse, and the curse was laid on them by the son's mother, if that makes sense. I really liked this different kind of take on Beauty and the Beast, and it was so unique. It felt very much like a historical fantasy. It was also very well written and quite spicy as well. But while it didn't feel like the spice was, like it was all about the spice. Like it felt like the spice was really building the relationship. And I loved that. It was just really good. I loved the characters. I loved the side characters. I highly recommend it. It is such an underrated standalone fantasy romance. Next, let's talk about a book that's great for summertime, because this is Captive of the Pirate King by Rebecca F. Kenney. There are so many more Rebecca F. Kenney books that I really want to check out. I'm always seeing so many like great reels and some great promo from her Instagram, and she has such an extensive backlist. I've only read 2 books by her, and this one is the favorite of the 2. And this is another enemies to lovers. This is a pirate fantasy romance. Our heroine has some really cool powers that she kind of keeps secret. She is trying to find her brother. Her brother's gone missing. So one day when she is searching for her brother, a pirate ship comes and attacks the ship that she's on. So in order to keep herself safe while still being able to find her brother, the choice is basically jump overboard or try to join the ship. Like, this pirate king doesn't take girls or women. And so if she is caught as a woman, like, she's going to basically die. So she decides to change her appearance to look like a boy to try to work on the pirate ship and try to survive that way. So she does this, and obviously a romance ensues. I love the trope of like a woman disguising herself to be on a pirate ship. I just love that trope. It's such an interesting micro trope, but I always really enjoy it. And this is just really well done. I thought it was a lot of fun. This also is technically in a series, but the series I don't even know if it's even interconnected. They're all about these dark villainous rulers, if that makes sense. So this one is obviously the Pirate King. But yeah, highly recommend, and I need to try more in that interconnected series. If you want to try out a cozy fantasy romance, this is a standalone, I highly recommend Love Letters and Thirst Tonics. This is by Haley Blackwood, and I don't see many people talking about this one. It's not really been out long, and you guys know I really like my cozy fantasy romance, like obviously like Sword Heart and like the Very Secret Society of Regular Witches. Like I have so many standalone fantasy romance recommendations that are like cozy, but I want to talk about this one because like I said, I think it's underrated as well. And this is about two vampires, and they're in this cozy little town. Our heroine owns like a trinket shop, and things are just going sideways in this town. Like, what is going on? Everything is basically falling apart. No one knows what's happening, like why they're encountering so much bad luck. There's this new vampire in town, and he is doing carpentry to help out. And our heroine's best friend helps make these thirst tonics that ease her vampire thirst. And they're very helpful in basically making vampires not so hangry. And the problem with their thirst tonics are that there are oftentimes some unintended side effects. So our heroine's hair is blue due to this thirst tonic she's taken. When the story first starts, her hair is turned blue from a thirst tonic. And early on in the book, like her store is attacked by like these beetle things. And it's like half collapsed. It's just destroyed. And so she needs the help of the carpenter, the new vampire carpenter, who by the way is extraordinarily grumpy, like super grumpy, but so is she. So it's really fun because it's grumpy. He is helping her fix the carpentry shop. It is like very much like forced proximity for that reason, but it's also grumpy. They're kind of like hate to love kind of scenario, and it's just cozy and fun and sweet and a really great time. Highly recommend if you're looking for like cozy standalone fantasy romance. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're looking for a dark, gothic, sultry, and super spicy fantasy romance that is also a standalone, I highly recommend Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. This is a really cool fantasy romance that is very gothic feeling. Our heroine is a necromancer, and she can see apparitions and ghosts and ghouls. Basically anything that's like undead, and she ends up trying to save her sister who has joined this very deadly competition called Phantasma. It shows up out of the blue in towns and is a very deadly competition, and so it has showed up in her town, and at the same time her sister's gone missing, and she finds like clues that tell her that her sister has indeed joined this really dangerous competition. So she joins the competition to save her sister. During this process, she meets I think, is he a phantom? Yeah, I had to check, but yes, he is a phantom. So she ends up needing to get the help from this phantom, and there's like one rule in Phantasma, and there are awful consequences if you break it. And the rule is do not fall in love in Phantasma. Obviously, you can guess what happens from there. But this phantom kind of works at this competition. There's like a series of trials and some really crazy spice scenes too. Also, please don't let me forget, check your trigger warnings for this one for sure. Check your triggers because it can get quite dark. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for something more gothic and spicy for a fantasy romance standalone. Another standalone I highly recommend that is technically connected to another series is Slaying the Vampire Conqueror by Carissa Broadman. This is technically connected to the Serpent and the Wings of Night series, The Crowns of Nyaxia, but it's still definitely a standalone. It is its own story. It's just interconnected. You don't have to read one thing before the other, and it definitely stands on its own. Our heroine is like I guess she's like a witch, and she's part of this coven-y, culty kind of assassins guild, and she's an assassin, and the world is actually really cool in this one. It reminds me so much of, is it Dragon Keep or Dragon, I can't remember, but it reminds me of like the ocean seaside parts in Game of Thrones. Very dark and gray and misty and salt air and very gloomy. and I really liked it. So she is sent by this like Assassin's Guild to unalive this vampire conqueror who has come to take over their land. And this vampire conqueror is just known to be super brutal, super powerful. This girl, she doesn't F around. This is a really awesome enemies to lovers story. Technically, it's also part of a different interconnected series where it's like all enemies to lovers stories, and each book is written by a different author, and they actually don't even take place in the same world. Like each author wrote their own thing that's fully, they're not connected at all. Literally the only thing that they have in common is that they are enemies to lovers. So sometimes you may say like vampires or witches are more on the paranormal spectrum, which I totally get. But at the same time, this book has fantasy romance vibes. Does that make sense? So like it definitely feels like a romantasy or a fantasy romance, specifically because it has the vibes, the aesthetics, the atmosphere, the feeling of it being a fantasy romance. It is so freaking good. It's dark. It is really well written. I had so much fun with it, and so highly recommend this one. So there you have it. Those are my standalone fantasy romance book recommendations for you. I hope you guys liked this video. I hope you enjoyed getting some standalone romantasy recommendations. I think there needs to be more of these books. Like, give me more. If you have any recommendations, please leave them down below in the comments. I'd love more recommendations, and I'm sure everyone watching this would like them too. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. All of my social media, including my Patreon, my Goodreads, my Instagram, TikTok, Discord, all of that is down below in the description. Until next time, fellow readers, keep reading and living your best life. Guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away, but I've known you too long.